Welcome to the deep dive. We're really glad you're joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.
We've got some fascinating material today, shared by a listener, actually. It's excerpts from a pretty major philosophical work.
Oh, it's definitely major and dense, but incredibly rewarding if you stick with it.
Right. It tackles these huge ideas, reality, the mind, emotions, what freedom even is. It's a lot.
It presents a whole system, really, a different way of looking at absolutely everything.
So our mission, yours and mine and yours listening, is to kind of unpack that, cut through the complexity, find those key insights, maybe some surprising facts.
Exactly. It starts from the ground up, building this logical structure. It tries to explain existence itself and then, where we fit in.
Okay, let's dive right in then. It seems like the system really hinges on some core definitions first, foundational stuff.
Absolutely. It starts with substance, definition 3, I think.
Okay, substance. What is it?
Well, it's defined as that which is in itself and is conceived through itself. You don't need anything else to understand it.
Self-contained, self-explaining.
Right. And crucially, its essence involves existence. It has to exist just by its nature. Proposition 7 covers that, and it's determined only by itself.
Okay, pure independence. Got it. Then there's attribute. Def 4.
An attribute is what the intellect perceives of that substance as constituting its very essence.
So the fundamental ways we can grasp what this substance is.
Kind of like its essential characteristics that our minds can access. Yeah.
All right, and then modes. Definition 5.
Modes are the modifications of substance. They're the things that exist in something else and are conceived through something else.
So like individual things. This table, my thought right now.
Exactly. Specific trees, feelings, your body, things that don't exist on their own but are ways the substance is expressed or modified. They depend on substance.
Substance attribute mode.
Yeah.
Seems clear enough. But then the text makes this pretty huge leap, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Based just on these definitions.
This is where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit mind-bending. Proposition 5. Using just logic from those definitions, it argues there can only be one substance.
Only one. How does that work?
Well, think about it. If you had two substances, they couldn't share any attributes, right? Because if they did, one would have to be conceived through the other, which violates the definition of substance and make it a mode.
Yeah.
And if they had totally different attributes, they'd have nothing in common. One couldn't limit or cause the other. So the logic forces the conclusion. There's only room for one unique substance.
Wow. Okay, one substance. That's already a massive shift from how we usually see the world, like full of separate objects.
Oh, absolutely.
And this single substance is what?
It's identified with God or nature. The text uses those terms interchangeably. Definition 6, proposition 14.
God or nature.
Yeah. This one substance is God or nature, an absolutely infinite being, infinite attributes, each expressing eternal, infinite essence. It's the totality of reality.
So not a creator outside of nature, but God is nature, the whole thing.
Precisely.
And it exists eternally. You mentioned eternity.
Yes, but eternity here isn't just endless time. Definition 8 is key. It's existence itself, understood as necessarily following from the definition of the eternal thing.
Like a mathematical truth. 2 plus 2, 4 is just true, timelessly.
Exactly like that. It's an eternal truth. Its existence is part of its nature, not something that happens in time or depends on anything else. It just is necessarily.
So God nature exists with this absolute timeless necessity. How does it act? Does it have goals? Make choices?
Well, Proposition 16 is clear. God acts only by the necessary laws of his own nature. There's no outside force because there is no outside.
Nothing constrains it.
Nothing. And since everything exists in God and can't be conceived without God, that's God. Proposition 15, God is the cause, not just that things exist, but of their very essence, too. Proposition 24, corollary.
So no room for purpose, like God deciding to make things for a reason.
That's a huge point the text tackles head on. It argues that thinking God or nature acts with an end in view, like humans do, is a deep-seated prejudice.
A prejudice.
Yeah. It calls it a sanctuary of ignorance in the appendix to Part 1. We see things as useful to us, eyes for seeing, sun for warmth, and we project that purposefulness onto the universe.
We assume it works like we do.
Exactly. We make up a ruler of the universe based on our own nature. But the text says, look at experience. Good things and bad things happen to everyone, regardless of piety. Reality doesn't seem to follow our ideas of purpose or fairness.
So final causes are just a human way of thinking, mistakenly applied to everything.
That's the argument. A confusion, a really important nugget stripping purpose from the ultimate nature of reality.
Okay. Wow. So reality is this one, necessary, non-purposeful substance, God or nature. How do we fit in? As humans, we feel separate. We definitely feel like we have purposes.
Right, that brings us to part 2, the human condition. And here's another challenging idea. The human mind is simply the idea of the human body.
The idea of the body.
Yeah. Mind and body aren't two different things interacting. They're like two sides of the same coin. Two expressions of the one substance, viewed under different attributes, thought and extension.
So they correspond perfectly.
Perfectly. Proposition 7 in part 2 says the order and connection of ideas in the mind is exactly the same as the order and connection of modifications of the body. They run in parallel.
So my thought isn't causing my hand to move, and my stubbed toe isn't causing the pain thought.
Not in a direct sequential way. They're simultaneous expressions of the same underlying event in the substance.
That's tricky to get your head around.
Yeah.
Given that parallelism, how does knowledge work? How do we understand anything?
Okay, so the text describes 3 kinds of knowledge, moving from, let's say, foggy to crystal clear. First kind is opinion or imagination.
Okay, with that.
It's based on random sensory stuff, like just seeing or hearing things without much understanding. Or based on signs, like words we hear or just hearsay.
So surface level stuff.
Yeah.
Easily mistaken.
Totally. It's described as confused, inadequate, unreliable. Like the example given, imagining the sun is only 200 feet away because it looks small. That's imagination.
Right. Or general ideas like dog or tree.
Exactly. Those general notions come from muddled images from our senses, which is why my idea of dog might be really different from yours based on the dogs we've happened to see.
And falsity, error. It's not really a thing in itself.
No, according to Proposition 35 in Part 2, falsity lies in the privation of knowledge. It's what's missing in a confused idea, not something positive.
Okay, so imagination is kind of the default, messy way we get information. What's the next level?
The second kind is reason. This is much more solid. It's based on common notions.
Common notions.
Yeah, things that are common to all bodies, like extension, motion, rest. Properties that are equally in the whole and the part, which the text says we can conceive adequately, clearly. And it's also based on adequate ideas of the properties of things derived from these common notions.
So like understanding the general laws of physics or logic.
Kind of, yeah. It allows us to see necessary connections, to distinguish true from false, because it deals with clear, distinct ideas that reflect reality more accurately. It's the basis of science and rational thought.
Makes sense. And the third kind, you said there were 3.
The third and the highest is intuition, or intuitive science.
Intuition, like a gut feeling.
Not quite like that. It's described as proceeding from an adequate idea of some attribute of God, that fundamental nature of reality, directly to adequate knowledge of the essence of individual things.
So, seeing how a specific thing necessarily flows from the ultimate reality.
Exactly. It's presented as this immediate, unified grasp, seeing the particular as a necessary consequence of the universal all at once, the highest form of understanding.
That sounds profound. Okay, going back to us as individuals, these modes, our existence isn't necessary, right? Unlike substance.
Correct. Part 2, Axiom 1. Existence doesn't belong to the essence of finite things like us. Our existence is contingent. It depends on other causes in the huge, infinite chain of cause and effect that is the common order of nature.
So we're just temporary ripples in this giant ocean of substance.
In a way, yes. And our own mind has a very inadequate grasp of how long our body will last. That adequate knowledge, the text says, resides only in God, in the totality of nature.
Humbling stuff. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Emotions. This system seems so logical, almost mechanical. How does it handle the messy, intense world of human feelings?
This is one of the most revolutionary parts, I think, in Part 3. The text argues we should study emotions scientifically.
Scientifically?
Yeah, not judging them as virtues or vices or things outside nature, but as natural phenomena. They follow necessary laws, just like storms or geometry.
Wow. Treat anger like air pressure.
Kind of. The preface to Part 3 says man isn't a kingdom within a kingdom, somehow separate from nature's laws. Emotions are part of that necessary order.
Okay, so no more blaming or praising emotions, just understanding them. What are the basic building blocks then?
There are 3 primary effects, or emotions: desire, pleasure, and pain.
Desire, pleasure, pain. Let's break those down. Desire.
Desire is defined as the very essence of a person. Insofar as it's conceived as determined to act, it is that fundamental striving.
The conatus. That urge everything has to keep existing, to persist in its being.
Exactly that. Propositions 6 and 7 in Part 3. The conatus, this endeavor to persist, is the actual essence of the thing itself. Desire is just conatus made conscious, often directed towards something specific.
Okay, so desire is fundamental striving. What about pleasure and pain?
They're defined as transitions. Pleasure is a transition to a state of greater perfection or power. Pain is a transition to a state of lesser perfection or power.
Perfection meaning more ability to act, more
Yeah.
power to persist.
Precisely. An increase or decrease in our power of acting, or, for the mind, our power of thinking. So emotions are directly tied to our core drive and whether it's being helped or hindered.
And there's a distinction between active and passive emotions.
Yes. Passive states, passions, are emotions linked to inadequate ideas. They happen to us, driven by external things we don't fully understand. The more confused our ideas, the more passive we are.
And active states.
Activities, or actions of the mind, arise from adequate ideas. When our emotions flow from our clear understanding, from our own nature, they are actions.
Okay, so how do specific feelings like love or hate arise from desire, pleasure, pain?
It builds them up systematically. Love is simply pleasure, accompanied by the idea of an external cause. Hate is pain, accompanied by the idea of an external cause.
So if something causes me pleasure and I connect it to that thing, I feel love towards it.
That's the model. And from there, it explains dozens of other emotions. Envy is hatred felt towards someone enjoying good fortune. Hope is pleasure mixed with doubt about a future outcome. Fear is pain mixed with doubt. Wonder is being stuck on a novel idea. Humility is pain from seeing our weakness. Pride is excessive self-pleasure, often based on others' opinions.
It's like a physics of the emotions.
Yeah.
Deriving complex states from basic principles.
Exactly. It's incredibly systematic.
And you mentioned earlier that this system reframes good and bad. How does that tie into emotions?
Right. This comes up again strongly in Part 4's preface. Good and bad aren't inherent properties of things. They're just labels we use based on comparison or how useful something is to us, how it affects our power, our pleasure, or pain.
The music example again. Good for one person, bad for another.
Yeah. Music isn't objectively good or bad. Its effect depends entirely on the listener's state and nature. So, good just means known to be useful to me in preserving my being or increasing my power. Bad means known to be harmful. They're relative concepts.
Another major reframing of common sense. Okay, if emotions are natural, necessary parts of us, why does the text talk about human bondage? Sounds negative.
It is, in a sense. Bondage refers to our state when we are ruled by these passive emotions, the passions.
Why did that happen so often?
Because, as Part 4 argues, we are necessarily a part of nature. We're constantly affected by external causes, things outside ourselves, and the power of those external causes can vastly exceed our own power to resist or maintain our state.
Infinitely stronger, you said.
Potentially, yes. Proposition 3 in Part 4. An external force can always overwhelm our individual power. So, a passion arising from a strong external cause can easily overpower our own desires, even those based on reason.
Like knowing smoking is bad, but the immediate craving, driven by external cues and internal states, wins out.
A classic example, especially because, as Proposition 9 notes, emotions tied to things we perceive as present are usually much stronger than those tied to the future or past.
So the immediate pleasure outweighs the reasoned knowledge of future harm.
Often, yes, that's the mechanism of bondage being tossed about by external causes and conflicting passions rooted in confused ideas.
This really seems to undermine the idea of free will. Does the text tackle that directly?
Oh, absolutely. Part 3, Proposition 2 note. It flatly states that free will is an illusion.
An illusion? How so?
Men think they're free because they're aware of their actions and desires, but they're totally ignorant of the complex chains of causes that determine those desires and actions.
So we see the wanting and the doing, but not the why behind the wanting.
Exactly. The text argues the will isn't some separate faculty making choices. A volition, a specific act of willing, is just the affirmation or negation inherent in an idea itself. And ideas are determined by prior ideas and bodily states, stretching back infinitely.
So no independent command center called the will.
Nope. It even discusses the old problem of Burden's ass the donkey starting between two identical bales of hay because it has no reason to choose one over the other, highlighting the issue with undetermined free choice.
Okay, so we're determined, often ruled by passions. What does this mean for how we interact? if everyone's just acting out their determined nature and passions?
Well, the text notes in part 4 that when people are ruled by passions, they are often at odds with each other. Envy, ambition, hatred, these passive states naturally lead to conflict.
Because everyone's just pursuing their own perceived advantage based on confused ideas.
Right, and this inherent conflict and instability is why society becomes necessary. People realize they need mutual help for security and benefit.
So society is a rational arrangement.
It arises from the need to overcome the downsides of being ruled purely by passion. Individuals agree, by common consent, to give up some of their natural right, the right to do whatever they have the power to do in exchange for living under common laws.
And concepts like justice, sin, merit.
According to the text, these are extrinsic ideas. They only have meaning within a social contract defined by common consent and law. They aren't features of nature itself.
Wow. Okay, so that's bondage. Being driven by passions, ignorant of causes, often in conflict. Is there a way out? What's the path to freedom?
Yes, there is a path, but freedom here doesn't mean breaking the chains of cause and effect. That's impossible. Freedom means being led solely by reason.
Acting from understanding, not passion.
Exactly. The free person, described towards the end of part 4, isn't motivated by fear of punishment or hope of reward. They desire the good directly because they understand, through reason, that it is good meaning, truly useful for preserving and enhancing their being according to their nature.
So freedom is aligning yourself with necessity through understanding. How do we actually do that? How does the mind gain power over those overwhelming passions?
Part 5 is all about the power of the intellect, or human freedom. It lays out several strategies, all boiling down to increasing understanding using reason and intuition, the second and third kinds of knowledge.
Okay, what's the first step?
First, just gaining clear knowledge of an emotion. Proposition 3 in part 5 says an emotion ceases to be a passion, something that happens to us as soon as we form a clear and distinct idea of it. Understanding its mechanics takes away its passive power.
So analyzing your anger helps diffuse it.
To the extent you understand it adequately, yes. Second, separating the emotion from the thought of its external cause, which is often confused, and linking it to other, more stable thoughts based on reason.
Detaching it from the specific trigger.
And connecting it to broader understanding. Third, referring emotions to things we understand distinctly, like the common properties of nature or God's substance itself, rather than just the confused particular thing that set it off. Emotions linked to adequate ideas are stronger and more stable over time.
Focusing on the universal rather than the particular trigger.
Sort of, yes. Understanding the bigger picture. Fourth, consciously arranging and associating the modifications of our body, our physical states, and the ideas linked to them according to the order of the intellect, the order of reason.
Like actively rehearsing rational responses.
Exactly. The text gives the example of meditating on common wrongs and how to meet them with high-mindedness, connecting the idea of the injury with the rational precept of how to respond. You're building new rational associations.
Okay, and fifth.
Fifth, understanding that the force of any particular passion is limited when compared to the power of understanding eternal and necessary truths, the kind of knowledge we get from reason and intuition. This perspective diminishes the passion's relative power.
So it's an active intellectual training process, using understanding to gain control.
Yes, and this whole process is virtue. Remember how virtue was defined?
Acting according to the laws of one's own nature, the kanadas.
Right. And what does the mind, guided by reason, fundamentally strive for?
To understand.
Exactly. Proposition 26, part 4. The effort to understand is the first and only foundation of virtue.
So virtue is the pursuit and application of understanding.
That's the core idea, and therefore what's truly good and useful is whatever helps us understand better, whatever aligns with our rational nature.
And the highest good, then, for someone following this virtuous path,
is to know God. Which means, remember, to understand the fundamental nature of reality, the one substance.
And this good is shareable.
Yes, uniquely so. Proposition 36, part 4. It's common to all who are guided by reason, and everyone can equally enjoy it. My understanding doesn't take away from yours.
How does someone living by reason interact with others according to this?
The text says they naturally agree in nature because reason is universal. They are the most useful to one another because they help each other understand.
They want others to understand too.
Yes, they desire for others the same good they seek for themselves, which is understanding. Proposition 37. They try to return love for hatred, understanding that hatred diminishes everyone's power.
What about emotions like pity?
Pity, if it's just pain at another's misfortune without leading to rational action, is considered bad for the rational person. Same for overesteem or disparagement, they cloud judgment. But approval based on reason or true self-esteem based on one's power of rational action can be good. Repentance is seen as unhelpful. It's pain about the past, whereas reason focuses on future action.
It's a demanding ethical framework focused entirely on understanding. What about that idea of the mind's eternity you mentioned earlier?
Right, Part 5 brings us back. Proposition 23 argues the human mind can't be completely destroyed with the body. Something eternal remains.
What part?
The part that conceives things under the form of eternity. The part capable of rational and intuitive knowledge, understanding necessary truths outside of time.
And this connects to intuition, the third kind of knowledge.
Directly. Proposition 31. Intuitive knowledge depends on the mind, precisely as it is eternal. This direct grasp of essences flowing from God's attributes is the highest virtue and highest striving of the mind.
And what does achieving this highest knowledge lead to?
It leads to the highest possible mental acquiescence, a deep peace and contentment, Proposition 27. And, crucially, it gives rise to the intellectual love of God.
Intellectual love.
Yes. Proposition 32. It's not an emotional appeal to God, it's the joy and understanding that arises from understanding God nature as the infinite, necessary, and perfect source of everything. It's eternal, like the understanding it springs from.
And you can't hate God or want God to love you back.
Correct. Propositions 18 and 19. God doesn't have passions like love or hate. The intellectual love of God is purely the mind's delight in understanding reality.
So, the ultimate freedom and happiness is this state of deep understanding and the intellectual love that comes with it.
Yeah.
But what if you don't get there? Is reason still worthwhile?
Absolutely. Proposition 41 makes that point clearly. Even if you didn't know the mind was eternal, the basic precepts of reason, acting virtuously, seeking understanding, cooperating, controlling passions, are still of primary importance.
Why?
Because they are based on seeking our true advantage, our genuine self-interest, which reason shows lies in understanding and harmonizing with nature. This is contrasted with the masses who are often motivated by simple hope and fear of external rewards or punishments. Reason provides a more stable and intrinsically valuable path regardless of beliefs about eternity.
Wow. Okay, that's been quite a journey through this system.
Yeah.
From the ground up, defining reality itself.
Yeah, starting with that single substance, God or nature.
Through how mind and body are parallel expressions, how emotions are natural forces tied to our drive to persist.
The illusion of free will, the state of bondage to passions.
And then the path out, the path to freedom, which isn't about escaping necessity, but about understanding it through reason and intuition.
Leading ultimately to that intellectual love of God, of reality itself.
The big takeaway seems to be that freedom, real freedom and happiness, comes from increasing our power of understanding, becoming more active agents guided by reason, rather than passive subjects tossed about by confusion and external forces.
That's it perfectly. Moving from opinion through reason towards intuition, finding your highest good and your virtue in the act of understanding itself.
Which leaves us, you listening, with a really provocative thought to mull over. If virtue and the highest good truly lie just in understanding and acting out the necessity of your own nature that drives to persist and understand, how does that change the way you think about your own efforts, your choices, your successes and failures, and what you're actually pursuing when you seek happiness?